July 12th, the Republican Senator George made a brief speech at a local campaign rally, and one sentence carried deep meaning. If Trump loses in the November election, we may have to fight a civil war to save America. Thus, the American election has finally become a dangerous issue, and the whole world is waiting for America's actions
A
this year to
congressman
unfold.
from the
There is
United
no compromise.
States told me one day,
There is no room for compromise between the government and the public. In the US election, Dang Wang faced Harris. Harris achieved a historic and significant victory. Almost all media overwhelmingly believe that Harris has a greater chance of winning. Of course, the fans of the King of Understanding, the rednecks, are also very crazy.
One, two, 1, 3.
They believed that the king had won. The rednecks are actually a scar behind America's prosperity. After the king appeared, this scar on America finally began to fester and bleed. They experienced America's prosperity, but ultimately became a generation abandoned by America. So, what exactly are rednecks, and what will these people sacrifice for the king? This is what the Republican rednecks and the Democratic liberal elites represent. Ordinary people. Take. The conflict between the two classes is an issue left over from history, which was intensified just as the appearance of Dong Wang. From the early colonial period, differences could be noted between people in the northern and southern United States. For example, New England in the northern United States consisted of Puritans on the Mayflower. They crossed the ocean from Europe due to religious disputes. Most of those who could practice religion were educated citizens, which defined the foundation of this group. New England quickly became the birthplace of American culture. At this time, the southern regions of the United States were gathering a large number of plantation owners. Especially exiled was that very poor class. When Europe had not yet begun the Industrial Revolution, there were also many homeless people. These people were uneducated and did not have faith.
Okay. So,
But there are specialized investigation reports that show 1/5 of the white people in the southern United States are
Spire. Very good. Really?
the forced sterilization of southern white people.
Just like this.
The families of these white people were required to undergo forced sterilization, and in total, over 50,000 white Southerners were sterilized. So, when did people start paying attention to this group?
Gradually began to emerge over 50
The
years.
wind of Soviet communism began to blow across the world. When the Soviet Union achieved significant success in the joint production of technology, American capitalists were forced to devote some effort to win over the Reds.
After we leave, they will give you holidays, schools, and hospitals, and will raise your wages. This is not because they have found their conscience or become good people, but because we have been here. This made American capitalists at the time feel as if facing a great enemy. After all, with the Soviet Union as a comparison, all the major capitalists had a sense of crisis of being overthrown and could only abandon exploiting the rednecks and start doing the work themselves. In 1997, the typical annual salary for American adults could reach $55,000 US,
Generally,
while the average total income in the US was only $8,734 US. At this time, rednecks were living extremely comfortably. After the 1990s, the United States began to cluster and continuously transfer industrial chains offshore, leaving only the more profitable financial sector domestically. As the main body of industrial workers, they started to lose their glory and were gradually marginalized in American society. Wall Street finance became a comfort zone run by white liberals. Before the emergence of the rednecks, the United States Democratic Party began to advocate for equality and freedom, focusing on African American rights and supporting declining diverse freedoms. Originally, the rednecks were extremely conservative in their beliefs. What they like is America first and putting people first. As a result, after the status of African Americans rose, it directly overshadowed the rednecks, and large groups of people with unspecified genders are challenging the values of the rednecks. The decline in social status, combined with the Democratic Party's governance concepts and economic pressure. The root cause of the redneck path is the division among the lower class, and the two major American parties have also begun to be at odds. The origin of any party dispute is actually a conflict of interest. Initially, in the United States, it was the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists were the early stage of the Democrats. The Federalists mainly represented the industrial and commercial bourgeoisie, favoring centralization, while the Anti-Federalists supported the American farming class, opposing centralization and seeking high autonomy for each state. The Federalists disappeared after the War of 1812, and the Anti-Federalists. The United States began the westward movement, opening up wasteland, fighting for territory, and killing Native Americans. The Republican Party split from another party and started supporting the interests of big capital and large industrial and commercial groups. In fact, it was the interest groups behind that supported the party's emergence, as capital has always influenced politics. This has not changed until now. The US political scene is inherently inseparable from old aristocratic families. So, under the loud voices, President Carter.
Okay. Not giving. I said a sentence before. I work hard. Hey!
A president with no foundation definitely cannot last long. In a deeply rooted political arena, dominated by established families, Carter became a failed president because a gap opened in American politics. So, how can political newcomers compete with established families? The ones learning from the East are actually Republican political managers. He is a politician who caters to voters. He first organizes people to gather topics that concern voters. Then, during speeches, he talks extensively about these topics, 3 times bashing the ruling party's inaction with a sincere demeanor of being in charge. And everyone doesn't care if what he says makes sense. They just listen, as long as it's enjoyable. Now, many rednecks understand my speeches and enjoy them. It's all the same trick. So, to win votes, both parties in the United States can change their stance at any time, like on a crucial issue. Before 1972, the majority of Republicans supported abortion, with only 39% opposing it within the party. Later, the reason for the Republicans' change in stance on this issue was very simple. They specifically held a meeting to study some swing voters, as the Catholic principles are conservative. This group of people is against abortion, and they are Democrats. In other words, the Republican Party opposed abortion to win over swing voters from the Democrats, just like the Democrats granting immigration benefits in Republican strongholds, all for the sake of votes. After the Republicans shifted, many swing voters did join the Republican camp, but the Republican voters who originally supported abortion. For this reason, they even joined the Democratic Party, exchanging votes with each other. Everyone calculated how to trade without losses. Such operations happen frequently. The two parties continually change extreme issues for votes. Originally, voters were mixed together. Saying it like this, it's possible that some people do not oppose abortion, but do not like black people. And some may support LGBT, but oppose abortion. Originally, these people were mixed together and could influence each other. Both parties continually seek votes, by wooing voters, causing the division among their supporters to become increasingly extreme until they are incompatible with each other. Is there really no one in the redneck base who supports abortion? But it might be because they dislike
black person.
and opposing the Democratic Party. After this polarization has not effectively resolved issues like industrial zoning and social distribution, the answer lies in those automobile industry, steel industry, and chip manufacturing industry workers who, with one person working, could support a family living in a big house. They were abandoned and became the Rust Belt. Originally, the conglomeration was the Democratic Party's political achievement. Connecting this with the Democratic Party's continuous introduction of new immigrants, the red states would only become angrier and support the Republican Party more, causing the two parties to tear apart and society to become divided. In 40 time periods, the new Russia invested a total of 350. The cumulative casualties of 10,000 troops reached 750,000, including 400,000 soldiers who became disabled. At that time, the total population of the United States was around 31 million people. About 1% of young men in the North died in the war, while the death rate for Southern white men reached 3%. The Union and Confederate forces successively conducted 14 large-scale battles, lost a large number of young adults, and ultimately ended with the victory of the Northern and Chinese coalition forces. This counts as a relatively large civil war. For example, the Western hippie movement in the 1960s. During that time, American society was in chaos under the hippie movement. During the hippie movement, Kennedy was assassinated, even the president was killed, showing the seriousness of social contradictions in the US at that time. Various religions, various genders, the streets are full of wanderers and offenders, all under the American social systems. This is a very frightening thing for American capitalists, and not a very frightening thing for the world. A good thing about capitalist countries is that they need a division of public opinion. Only this way can social contradictions be covered up, and the forces behind the scenes can decide whom to support. Only with competition can there be benefits, and things like civil war and social unrest won't hurt any person in the upper class at all. The US Department of Homeland Security, in its 2024 security assessment, besides other annual events, mentioned the possibility of annual violent incidents. The US Department of Homeland Security stated in the report that conspiracy theories continue to spread in the US, tracing a long historical trajectory back to the early morning of January 6th during the Capitol Hill riot incident.
and the increasing racism, anti-Semitism, and rising chauvinism. These have all become mainstream in American political and social principles, coupled with the easily accessible weapons in the United States. Therefore, the possibility of politically motivated domestic violence should not be ignored, including mass shootings, attacks on central infrastructure, explosions, and other assaults. The American social fabric suggests that this election might trigger such conflicts. Events similar to the Capitol Hill riots may erupt again in the upcoming election, with occurrences from Biden's withdrawal to Trump being shot, to Harris's participation in the election, and Trump's retreat from the race. The United States has already given an ultimate answer. Even if there is another bloody conflict, Trump will not be re-elected. There's nothing unprecedented here. It's not just rednecks with guns. The police and the FBI are armed too.